A church is a sacred space, a house of God where the faithful find forgiveness and sanctuary.
It was beautiful. It had been voted one time as one of the 10 most beautiful churches in Davidson County.
But here, something lurks in the shadows. Something that doesn't belong.
They thought it was some sort of satanic worship.
There were no tears, no remorse.
Something evil. Firefighters race through the streets of Nashville as a Pentecostal church erupts in flames.
My knowledge of the entire incident came when I received a phone call in the early morning hours in June. And I was told that there was a fire at the church located on Woodland Street. But when I walked up to the church, there was a crowd outside, and I had no idea who they were at that time.
There was quite a few members of that congregation that was standing around on the sidewalks and in the parking lot.
By the time they got there, Church of Emmanuel was burning pretty fiercely.
It was so sad just to see this beautiful building totally just destroyed.
But strangely, the shepherd of the flock isn't there. The fire department calls the home of Reverend David Terry to tell him his church is in flames. But he's nowhere to be found.
Oh my God, I don't know where David is.
As firefighters move into the burning church, they make an alarming discovery.
What do you think?
It sure looks like arson.
They clearly suspected arson because of the gas cans stacked near the front door.
Somebody has deliberately caused this fire.
But arson isn't the reason Detective Robert Moore has been called to the scene.
There's something in there you gotta see.
When I open the two doors, there's the sanctuary, and I can see everything is charred or smoked. All the chandeliers hanging from the ceiling were charred. Everything was black, and everything was still steaming from the water that had been put in the church. So it was rather eerie.
The real surprise is waiting in the attic.
Here. There it is.
There was a pile of 2x4s on top of a green outdoor type carpet. There was something under that carpet, and it was obvious that there was a large body.
Is this what it looks like?
Well, you tell me.
It was like a murder here in the church. I'm here in the sanctuary. This, is strange.
This arson case is now a homicide investigation.
We methodically just started removing lumber, fingerprint, move, photograph, every stage, and got down to the carpet. I knew right away that something was very strange about it, because you could see where the legs, the torso of the body, and then it abruptly ended. And I knew what I was fixing to look at just from that. The head was removed. His arm, on both arms, it was just like somebody took a knife and just took away a portion of flesh, maybe 1/4 of an inch deep and maybe 6 inches long, very neatly.
Someone has gone to great lengths to desecrate this body.
We had no head, no way of making identification.
Yet, there are a few pieces of telling evidence that survived the flames.
But he has a belt around his waist with the letter T in the buckle.
Isn't the pastor's name Terry?
Could be him.
While the police were conducting their investigation, they showed the belt buckle to the preacher's wife.
We found a body in the attic.
That's David's.
Medical exam is on the way out, so.
Word spread quickly that it was the preacher who was the victim.
Well, I was devastated. I considered David my friend.
But it's not just the pastor's name that is spreading through the crowd. Congregants fear his body was used for some dark ritual.
The word went out there's been some kind of black magic devil worship going on. They were terrified. They didn't know what it was, and they thought that, this was the devil's work and their beloved pastor.
Rumors did circulate pretty widely because of the nature of a headless body coming out of the top of a church that was burned. Lots of people were making assumptions and maybe drawing conclusions.
Although the truth remains hidden in the ashes of the church, suspicions take hold.
Who would do that? Kill another innocent person, cut their head off, set the church on fire.
Mind if I ask you a few questions, ma'am? You live near here?
I do, just across.
I've talked to everybody that was outside. We had witnesses that saw a person leave the back door of the church and get on a motorcycle and drive away somewhere close to midnight.
With no idea who drove off, police looked to find out more about the victim.
Brother, welcome.
Reverend John David Terry has been leading this small Pentecostal congregation of 80 people for about 15 years.
Sister Teresa, wonderful to see you.
He was a really good pastor.
He was very charismatic. Everybody really liked him. He was very dutiful. He was very, very pious. He was married. He had 3 children. And he was very well respected and beloved in the congregation.
So beloved that police are baffled. The pastor seems to have no enemies.
Lord, we thank you for your blessings.
The horrific crime leaves police with 2 questions.
For the nourishment of our bodies.
Who has murdered David Terry?
And why has someone taken his head? Someone has killed Reverend David Terry and left his decapitated body inside his own church. The shocked congregation can't imagine who would kill such a holy man.
He was very, very close with his congregation, and they loved him.
So we pray in Jesus' name.
While David is a much-loved reverend,
Amen.
It wasn't his first calling. He tried many paths before he decided to serve God.
He did a few things. He did some real estate. He also was a butcher.
He was one of the few ministers we had that had a college degree.
But in the end, he decided to follow in the footsteps of his father, Reverend James Terry.
His father had originally been pastor and then become bishop. It was seen that it was kind of an easy way for him to get into life if he joined the church. It was a ready-made job for him. But he had a problem with his father because his father put him down a lot.
David worked very hard to earn his father's respect, but it's not his dad who truly guides him.
He was incredibly close to his mother. His mother was his confidant, so he really looked to his mother to give him the support and the confidence which he lacked because his father was always putting him down.
She was a very sweet lady, just a sweetheart.
But as upright as David is, he's also quietly ambitious.
He was really looking to become bishop of all the churches in Nashville. His father had been bishop, then a friend of his father's became bishop, and as he came up to 65, which was retirement age, Reverend Terry expected to take over the job.
This meant going from about $40,000 a year, what he hoped would be about 80 plus, and doubling a salary.
Abel was a very good man. His brother Cain was not so good.
Until then, David is more than content to tend to his small but devoted flock.
Jesus.
Among them, Teresa Matheny.
He seemed to really love and care about the people there. We called each other brother and sister, like Brother William, Sister Teresa. A lot of the people there felt like that. They felt like family.
But in 1983, it's David's immediate family that suffers a real loss.
David's mother ended up getting Parkinson's and died.
That had a huge impact on him. He lost his confidant. He didn't have anybody that he felt he could trust.
Despite his loss, David remains strong for his congregation. But after his death, they are lost and confused, especially his wife, Brenda.
When's the last time you saw your husband?
He picked James up from the boarding house today.
She told me that David Terry was scheduled to go fishing with James Matheny.
Wonderful to see you, sister.
James Matheny, parishioner and Teresa Matheny's husband, is a special member of David's flock, though it took him a while to find his place.
How are you, Sister Teresa?
Always better after your sermon.
How's Brother James?
Not good.
James and Teresa have been married for 7 years. He's the love of her life.
When I first saw him, he was so cute. I fell hard. Got married, and then we had the most precious little boy.
James is a loving father and husband, but he has one critical flaw.
Jim had a problem with alcohol.
James Matheny had a lot of problems, as he was a very, very heavy drinker.
He didn't graduate high school. He could really not read that well.
James has trouble finding work and turns to the bottle to ease the pain.
It's just that people do get these issues, these problems that come up in their lives, and they either deal with them or it destroys them.
Jim, let him go. Jim, let him go. You're hurting him. Jim!
As the years pass, James is losing his battle with his demons.
Bring me back, my boy!
I realized, hey, I got to draw the line here. He's got to realize that I do love him, but I'm not going to live like this. And I just walked out one day and left. I just said, I've had enough.
When Teresa left him because of his alcoholism, he just literally fell apart. He drank even heavier, he had a mental breakdown and ended up in hospital.
Teresa.
He was really sick.
Teresa.
He just really looked bad.
I can't get through this without your support.
I don't know how. I can't.
The pastor. Call the pastor. Ask him to pray for me.
Even as David struggles with the loss of his mother, he's always there for his flock.
Brother David? Jim needs you. Would you pray for him?
You know what, Sister Teresa? I was just sitting here now thinking about him. I will pray for him.
Thank you.
My thought was, wow, God is really going to work this out for us. You know, God has laid Jim on his heart.
Give me your hands.
You know, I said, this could really be your answer to prayers, Jim. It really could be.
The Reverend wanted, offered to sort of put him back on his feet.
David believes in the redemptive power of hard work and quickly finds some for James.
He told Jim, he said, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a job at the church. You can be the handyman. I got stuff that you can do. And he said, and I'll pay you $10 an hour. Jim was so excited because he was actually doing something. He was feeling good about himself. That's what I wanted to see.
But David knows that James' rehabilitation requires more than hard work. It requires faith.
He made sure to baptize him, into God.
I was like, man, this is totally awesome. We're going to pull this together. We're both going to, raise this little boy together.
He decided to turn his life around, through prayer, going to church, getting involved.
I've been thinking about this. I've been reading this here pamphlet. And
Reverend David is soon more than James's spiritual guide.
He was there all the time.
He really loved David. He was talking and he said, I looked up this adult education program and I want to start going. They'll help me with my reading. Then I can get my GED. He was really making plans.
you really think I can do that?
Oh, I think the Lord will give you the strength to do anything you put your mind to.
I was thinking the same thing. Hey, you think maybe I could borrow $20 just till the end of the week? I'll pay it back. I'm
proud of you. Here.
As James charts a new course, the pastor also spends time with him outside of the church.
He was his best friend.
Y'all set?
Yeah, buddy. I'm ready.
James Matheny and the Reverend Terry had a planned fishing trip, just the two of them.
So I told Jim, I said, listen, if y'all are going to go fishing, just call and let me know, so don't worry.
Yet in a scant few hours, the Reverend's life will be reduced to ashes.
Well, they didn't go fishing. And I never got a call.
And the faith of an entire community is shaken.
Is somebody that cold and that cruel? It's like your world stops turning.
Reverend David Terry's decapitated body has been discovered inside a burning church. Police have a lead about a man who fled the scene on a motorcycle, but little else.
We put out the fact that a person left that church on a motorcycle, hoping to stir up more interest and maybe gain some more knowledge.
Police also hope they'll get precious information from the victim's best friend.
Yeah, pardon me, ma'am. Detective Moore.
But there's a problem.
They went to check at the rooming house, and James Matheny was not there.
He left with David Terry, so that was yet another piece of the puzzle that we begin to put together. So now, where is James Matheny?
Can you please give me a call?
James was the last person to see David alive, and he's missing. Teresa is worried that her husband may have met a similar fate as David.
Would Jim be there?
I called over to the place where he'd been, where he had the room. They hadn't seen him.
When did you see him last?
I was upset because it made me worry about him.
Could the man that David sought so hard to save be in danger himself? Or worse, could James Matheny have committed these atrocities?
They found the Reverend Terry's car parked about a block and a half away from the rooming house.
There was 2 containers, empty, beer bottle, and James Matheny may have been known to take a drink.
When they find David's credit cards with James's fingerprints on them, detectives fear the worst and quickly develop a theory about what might have happened.
They believe that Jim had done it, that he had killed David, that he got drunk and killed him.
There was a robbery gone wrong, and he'd killed Terry in the church and then tried to escape.
They told me that they had put an APB out on Jim. I was like, there is no way that Jim killed David. He loved him too much.
Detective Moore also remains unconvinced. In fact, he's about to turn this investigation on its head. And it all starts with the headless body.
Something was very strange about it. Here's a man, a large man. He has on white jockey shorts, but he has a black belt around his waist with a letter T in the buckle. And why would they take the filleted meat off his arms?
Moore suspects that this is much more complicated than a robbery gone wrong.
Through the medical examiner, you can get concrete evidence about the wounds, and part of his procedure is to x-ray. He's looking for possibly a bullet inside the body, something that we haven't observed. So the x-ray immediately brought the fact out that there was a medical problem in his chest area.
Let me just take a look at his file again.
The x-rays show evidence of obstructive pulmonary disease. Only David Terry has no such medical history.
I don't know who this is, but one thing I can tell you, it is not David Terry.
If it's not David, Detective Moore has a hunch who it might be.
Can you please pull the records for James Matheny?
James Matheny had been treated for certain chest diseases, and they were able to identify it positively to the x-rays.
We've had a break in the
Within
case.
24 hours, the story makes a violent 180. James, the alleged killer, is now the dead man.
It flip-flopped around. It was kind of crazy. It's like, how does this happen? And why did it happen? I mean, there was just so many questions running through my mind.
I just saw him last.
I thought, how am I going to explain this to a 3-year-old?
And if the preacher's not dead, where is he?
We've got a missing preacher.
And as word spreads, so does fear.
If it's not his body, then where is my husband?
Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you. We're going to do everything we can.
At that point, everybody, they just figured, well, they killed Jim, made it look like David, and took David off somewhere.
As the rumors continue to spread, a tip to the police gives them what they really need. Evidence.
I received a phone call that I could find a motorcycle at a storage warehouse.
The motorcycle matches the description of the one seen fleeing the church.
I opened the compartments, and inside that, there was a driver's license that belonged to James Milam.
More surprisingly, Malam's photograph on his driver's license looks strangely similar to David Terry.
We researched to find out who is James Milam. Found out he was deceased.
He died in 1st or 2nd grade in a boating accident. And the grave marker has a sad little drawing of a boy in a boat with a fishing pole.
Police wonder how a dead child is connected to the murder of James Matheny and the disappearance of David Terry. The answers soon come from an unlikely source, David Terry's lawyer.
When they first put the story out, I recognized the name as having been an old client of mine. I just said, well, it's a tragic situation. And And that remained so until we got a phone call. And it was David Terry.
I need to talk to the police. You make it happen.
He did not tell me his exact location, but from what I gathered, he was somewhere in North Mississippi.
The beloved pastor is alive, but is he still in danger?
He thought that was amazing. He thought it was actually a sign from God. He felt it was the first resurrection.
After his close friend James Matheny is brutally murdered, Reverend David vanishes, only to resurface a few days later with a lawyer at his side.
That was the first time I laid eyes on David Terry.
This man is a far cry from the beloved pastor described by his congregation.
I've been looking for you.
I was stunned when I saw him, and his head was shaved, no glasses.
Given that he was with James the day of the murder and vanished soon after,
We'd like to know
the police have many questions for the Reverend.
what happened that day at the church.
But they don't get the answers they're looking for.
Why the 5th?
David's silence shocks the police and raises Detective Moore's suspicions.
And I asked him some pointed questions.
Did you burn down that church? Did you kill James Matheny?
And I asked question after question, pointed questions, direct, and I wanted to see straight into his eyes.
Plead the 5th.
It was obvious to me that those questions shook him.
You gonna plead the 5th to all my questions?
I am.
Then this interview's over. There's no point. This interview's over.
While his silence is suspicious, it's far from hard evidence.
At that point, there was no arrest warrant for him.
The community rejoices that David has been found alive, and none of the faithful believe that David is really to blame for James's death.
The undercurrent feeling is that it was really James Matheny's fault.
They were saying that Jim had been drinking.
James, no. Please don't swear in the house of God.
No,
They thought he and the victim got in an argument.
I had to borrow another $20.
Spend it on alcohol?
Yeah, alcohol. God, you always try to act like you're better than me.
I'm trying to help you.
Don't touch me. You don't want to
No, James.
I want that money.
And he must have provoked Pastor Terry into this horrible action.
Maybe there had been not a fight, but maybe shoving back and forth or something.
No. James, come here.
This put David probably in a panic mode.
Only one person knows what really happened, and he's not talking. But the forensic evidence speaks volumes.
The medical examiner explained to me and showed me how clean cut all the tissue was.
Look, you see these cuts on the arm? Very, very precise. Like it was a fillet.
I found out that he did actually cut meat at one time for a living. Of course, that made perfect sense.
Yes.
When they track down the previous owner of the motorcycle, police find another piece of the puzzle.
You're absolutely positive. The gentleman in the photograph that I faxed to you is the gentleman that purchased your motorcycle.
The man identifies David Terry, but is using the name James Millam.
But I think, you know, how easy it would be for someone to come up with false ID and change their name.
As police consider why David may have created an alias, investigators find new clues in the church's financial statements.
There may have been some shenanigans going on with the funds that the church had been collecting.
It seems that faith isn't the only thing that motivates the Reverend.
Well, he felt there was a certain entitlement. You know, his father being bishop,
He had been in the church a long time and felt like it was his time to succeed.
David was expecting to become the next general overseer.
But the current bishop decides to stay on, and the promotion never comes.
To the dismay of John David Terry, this meant going from about $40,000 a year, what he hoped would be about 80 plus, doubling his salary, and it wasn't going to happen.
Since the church won't give David his due, he looks for other ways.
He sold the church parsonage. He got like $50,000 for it. And he started kind of embezzling. And that's when he decided, you know, well, if they weren't going to give it to him, he was going to take it.
But now something else mixes with his bitterness. The fear of getting caught.
He lived in a world that he resented and just had had enough. Wanted to get away.
One day, you know, he just happened to be in a bookstore and picked up a magazine. He was thumbing through it, and he found some adverts for a book that told you how to change your identity, how to kind of become another person. And a light bulb went off in his head. Terry decided he wanted to have a clean slate, to start a new life and be completely somebody different.
And that's where he learned to go find a dead person. The only dead person he knew or remembered was James Milam, which would have been his age, which he was in school together with him. He researches and discovers a grave site. He does that because he has to have the date of birth, exact date of birth, to get a birth certificate.
He'd been born 3 days before Terry, and he felt it was the finger of God that's pointing to him. It was a first resurrection.
And so, the transformation begins.
He gets the birth certificate, and with the birth certificate, he applies for a Social Security card in the name of the deceased. So once he gets that, now he can go get a driver's license.
Reverend Terry might not ride a motorbike, but James Milam does.
Reverend Terry's got a pocket full of cash now, so he buys a motorcycle.
I guess he had a glamorous view of him, his new life, where he'd be riding a motorcycle and tearing around.
David is ready to start that new life, but the old one remains a problem.
He wanted to make sure his wife and his kids were well taken care of, and he didn't want to leave any open ends where they might come looking for him.
But then a desperate phone call delivers a perfect solution.
Hello?
Brother David? Jim needs you.
Teresa doesn't know it yet, but they have just sealed James's fate.
You know what, Sister Teresa? I was just sitting here now thinking about him.
They both decided it was a sign of God, but for very different reasons.
We think we know people, but we really don't.
And David is now ready to do anything to escape his old life.
It was like leading a lamb to the slaughter.
Nashville police believe Reverend David Terry killed James Matheny and set his church on fire to cover it up. They still don't know why he mutilated James's body, but they have enough to arrest him.
You have the right to an attorney. If you can't afford one will be appointed to you. Do you understand your rights as I read them to you?
Miss Terry looked as stunned if I had smacked her. You're in a home where there's 2 children, a wife, that are not aware of what this man in their life that they've known all these years is now suspected of committing such a heinous murder. I just felt like give Miss Terry a hug and say, I'm sorry. Of course, I didn't and I couldn't.
Yet somehow, the community still stands by their reverend.
They still didn't believe it.
David Terry was the most loved individual probably in the history of this organization.
They would say things like, if Jim hadn't have been there, this would have never happened.
They had cast blame or ostracized James Matheny's wife.
After that, for a while, I had a real guilt. Well, if I had never married Jim, if I'd just left him alone, he'd still be alive. You know, David might have not done what he did. Finally, I just said, you know, I'm going to have to go and face him. And I did, and I went to the jail.
I've known you for so long, David. I need an answer. We all do.
Find out in court, like everyone else.
David is true to his word. Once in court, he pleads guilty.
That's all I ever wanted to hear out of his own mouth, that he was guilty.
And the truth about the crime comes out.
He wanted everybody to just think that he died, in a terrible, tragic way, and not come looking for him.
And for that, he needs a body.
He would do a switcheroo and use James Matheny as the scapegoat. It was clear he had selected him to be the one to be the victim.
David sets out to earn James's trust.
He baptizes James Matheny and pays so much attention to him that James Matheny literally worships him like the big brother that he never had.
On a hot, humid morning in June, Reverend David Terry gets up before dawn and makes his final preparations.
He had an envelope with $10,000 which he left for his wife to find.
At 8:30 a.m., David drives away from his home.
He set up the plan inviting James Matheny on a 2-day fishing trip.
Y'all set? Yeah, buddy, I'm ready.
And Matheny was really, really excited about this.
Hey, stop by the church first. I need your help with something.
Yeah, sure, no problem. The fish is still sleeping anyway.
Like leading a lamb to the slaughter. Reverend Terry asked him to help him get a few things down from the attic of the belfry, and of course he willingly obliges. I can just imagine him skipping up those stairs to go up there, and Terry coming behind him.
They were friends. I think he would have done anything that Reverend Terry told him to do.
It's those boxes. They're heavy.
All right, I can get that.
He actually left the .38 revolver in that room a few weeks earlier in preparation.
Yeah, they really are heavy.
That's when John David Terry shoots James Matheny in the back of the head.
He said later when he was testifying that he saw his face in Matheny's face when he killed him.
But David's day of work is only beginning.
Well, first of all, he sort of undressed Matheny's body. He bought a belt that his wife had given him for Father's Day the previous year with a big T on, so he could set up the identity.
A belt buckle won't be enough to sell this story. He has to take a grisly step.
He then got some butcher's knives, which he'd brought along, out of a canvas bag, and he started cutting the head off.
Without the head, there are no dental records, and seemingly no way to ID the body.
Because he was a butcher, he knew exactly how to do it. It was a very, very clean cut. He picked it up by the hair, he put it in a sack.
Rented a boat, went out on the lake, and dropped James Matheny's head into the lake. That evening is when he returns to the church building.
For David's plan to work, not only does he need a body, he needs a killer. And James can play both roles.
James Matheny was the perfect patsy for his plot. He knew Jim had a criminal record, was an alcoholic. He was trying to set up Matheny to show that there was a robbery gone wrong, and he'd killed Terry in the church and then tried to escape.
To reinforce the robbery scenario, the pastor makes sure that James's fingerprints also end up on his credit cards.
He dropped those in a car so it would be found near the halfway house Matheny was staying.
But before that, David realizes there's a little more work to be done.
He noticed there was a tattoo on Matheny's arm. So he got out the knife and he actually sort of stripped them off very cleanly, picked them up, put them in some paper, then went down to the toilet and flushed them down the toilet.
With the body dealt with and the evidence planted, it's time to go out in a blaze of glory.
He was trying to create a heroic death, for his congregation and his wife. Here was the Reverend Terry that had perished in these terrible circumstances, and it would really be sort of legend that would live on.
In his frenzy, David douses the church with gasoline and kerosene.
The accelerant that burns the fastest is the gasoline, of course, and that's what he should have splashed around the body.
Maybe he thought the fire would be hot enough that it would destroy all evidence of a body up there, except maybe the belt buckle.
At around midnight on June 15th, David turns his back on Reverend Terry.
He leaves Nashville with the church burning in his rearview mirror.
But David's misuse of the accelerants leaves the firefighters enough time to preserve part of the building.
It took so long for the fire to get going.
And more importantly, James Matheny's body.
The first water that went in the church actually fell on the body. To the right was burnt, to the left was burnt, but the body was not. And that's almost like, gee, somebody was speaking here that you don't commit a murder in this church and you don't have this type of crime to happen in a church.
There was yet still a miracle in it because the body was not burned. If the body would have been burned, there would have been no way to tell who it was. My son would have grown up thinking his dad was a murderer.
On August 6th, 1997, David Terry is convicted of murder and sentenced to death.
We were in the courtroom, and he had turned around and looked at me and apologized for what, he had done. And I looked at him and I said, well, I forgive you, but you still got to pay the price for what you've done.
In 2003, after many appeals, David looks for another kind of resolution. He takes his own life. For James's family, there's no satisfaction in his death, but there is some sense of relief.
It was closure, but not the closure that everybody wanted.
Basically, it was the end for me. I felt relieved.